Sherlock Holmes had rarely encountered a case so laced with mystery and deception. A prominent gentleman, Mr. Reginald Blackwood, had been found murdered under circumstances as baffling as they were sinister. The only apparent witness to the crime was a deaf-mute woman known as Miss Eleanor Hastings. Though unable to speak, she had been seen at the scene, her solemn gaze and measured gestures the only testimony available. Many assumed that her condition rendered her an unreliable observer, yet Holmes sensed that in her silence lay secrets waiting to be unravelled. Dr. Watson accompanied Holmes as they began to piece together the puzzle. They recalled that Mr. Blackwood, a man notorious for his ruthless business dealings and contentious relationships, had made enemies in every sphere. However, nothing among his many rivals had pointed clearly to a murderer. The investigation's turning point came when the authorities discovered traces of a rare, slow-acting poison on items belonging to Blackwood. Holmes mused, "Watson, note that this toxin, administered so discreetly, suggests a murderer of considerable cunning, one who wished to delay the revelation of death." Watson observed that the crime scene had been curiously free of signs of struggle or forced entry. It appeared as if Blackwood had trusted his killer implicitly, or perhaps had been rendered oblivious to the danger until it was too late. In these details, Holmes saw the hallmarks of premeditation. The poison's gradual effect, Holmes said, allowed the perpetrator to act without arousing immediate alarm. It was a subtle artifice, one that demands both access and technical expertise. Watson concurred, remarking, "And who among Blackwood's many associates could have possessed such knowledge?" The detectives soon turned their attention to Miss Hastings, whose proximity to the scene was no mere coincidence. Although her disability rendered her an unlikely suspect in the eyes of many, Holmes' keen observations led him to question the assumed innocence of the silent witness. "Observe her eyes, Watson," Holmes noted during a quiet conversation. "They betray a mind that is alert and calculating, a mind that perhaps knows more than it pretends." Watson, perplexed, yet trusting his friend's instincts, replied, "Are you suggesting that her silence is a guise to conceal a darker truth?" Holmes' thin smile was all the answer needed as he continued, "Sometimes the most unassuming figures orchestrate the grandest deceptions." In the days following Blackwood's death, Holmes and Watson scrutinized every detail of Miss Hastings' routine. They learned that she had been seen near Blackwood's residence on the day of the murder, her presence seemingly incidental. Yet Holmes could not shake the feeling that her apparent vulnerability was, in fact, a well-crafted alibi. Her gestures, he explained to Watson one afternoon, carry the precision of someone who has rehearsed her narrative. Notice the slight hesitation when questions arise about her whereabouts. It is as though she wishes to divert our attention. Watson, troubled by these observations, remarked, "It is remarkable that a person so outwardly fragile could display such composure under scrutiny." Further inquiry revealed that prior to his death, Mr. Blackwood had engaged in a heated dispute with an unidentified individual. A confrontation that had been witnessed by none other than Miss Hastings, according to accounts from nearby residents. This revelation added another layer to the mystery. Holmes speculated that the poisoning must have been administered during a private encounter, one in which Miss Hastings's presence, though unassuming, was far too convenient. It is as if the murderer positioned herself as the sole observer, manipulating events from the shadows, Holmes said gravely. A role that, for a moment, allowed her to appear innocent while she set the stage for her crime. The investigation took a decisive turn when forensic reports indicated that the toxin's incubation period allowed the victim's death to be misinterpreted in terms of timing. Blackwood's demise, initially assumed to have been instantaneous, was in fact delayed by several crucial hours. A delay that offered the murderer a perfect window to escape detection. Holmes remarked, "This calculated delay indicates that the perpetrator anticipated medical intervention, knowing well that time could blur the facts. It is the mark of someone who planned meticulously." Watson added, "And if that is so, then the precision of her every move, Miss Hastings' every silent gesture, might have been part of that plan. Holmes's suspicion regarding Miss Hastings deepened as he discovered a series of irregularities in Blackwood's financial records. Hidden among legitimate transactions were mysterious entries suggesting insider manipulation, transactions that, when traced, bore the fingerprints of someone intimately familiar with Blackwood's affairs. The financial trail, Holmes explained to Watson during one of their lengthy discussions, points to a motive that transcends personal vendetta. It hints at a broader conspiracy, one in which the victim's demise served a dual purpose: the elimination of an obstacle and the facilitation of lucrative gain. Watson observed, thus, the poison was not merely a means to an end, but part of an elaborate stratagem. Holmes nodded, replying, "Indeed, Watson. And in this stratagem, the silent witness appears not as an incidental bystander, but as an active architect of the crime." Holmes then arranged a discreet meeting with Miss Hastings, inviting her to answer questions that could only be addressed through observation and intuition. In this encounter, she maintained her customary silence, her responses confined to carefully measured gestures that seemed both rehearsed and evasive. Holmes scrutinized the subtleties in her signs, noting that they were imbued with an almost theatrical precision. "Your hands speak volumes," he remarked softly. "Yet they choose to reveal only fragments of the truth. It is a performance worthy of an experienced manipulator." Miss Hastings responded only by shaking her head slowly, a gesture that did little to quell Holmes's growing suspicion. As the investigation progressed, Holmes and Watson uncovered further evidence linking Miss Hastings to the methodical nature of the crime. In a painstaking review of forensic data, they found that trace amounts of the rare toxin were present on personal items belonging to her, items she had carried with an air of casual disregard. Holmes said, "These minute traces, almost lost to time, are a silent confession. They attest to contact with the very poison that ended Blackwood's life." Watson reflected, "It is as if every object you encounter, Miss Hastings, is a piece in the puzzle of your guilt." Holmes' reply was somber, and every piece, no matter how insignificant it appears, contributes to the complete portrait of a calculated crime. In a subsequent review of Miss Hastings' personal effects, the detectives discovered a meticulously kept journal. Though written in an unassuming hand, the journal contained encoded entries that, when deciphered, revealed a premeditated plan. Holmes noted, "Within these pages lie the blueprints of a crime executed with precision. Each entry, each subtle annotation, maps out the very steps you took to construct your alibi." Watson added, "It is a most damning record, an account that betrays your intentions even as you speak not a word." Holmes' eyes gleamed with a mixture of admiration and dismay as he remarked, "Intelligence, when misused, becomes the instrument of one's own downfall." The evidence mounted, and the inevitability of Miss Hastings's guilt became undeniable. Holmes gathered the details with the meticulous care of a master craftsman assembling his magnum opus. He recounted every nuance, the slight hesitation in her gestures, the uncanny alignment of her whereabouts with the timeline of Blackwood's poisoning, and the forensic traces linking her to the lethal toxin. "Watson," he said in one of their many quiet evenings of reflection, "we are witnessing a masterclass in deception. The very disability that the world deems a weakness has been transformed by Miss Hastings into a formidable shield. It allowed her to slip beneath the radar, unnoticed and unsuspected." Watson, whose respect for Holmes' deductive prowess was matched only by his own moral sensibilities, remarked, "Holmes, it is a chilling testament to the lengths one might go to hide behind the facade of vulnerability. I never imagined that silence could be weaponized so thoroughly." Holmes replied, "It is a lesson in the dual nature of human frailty and strength, Watson. In this case, silence was not absence, but a carefully curated statement. A statement that, in the end, spoke louder than any words ever could." The final act of this intricate drama unfolded in a tense confrontation arranged by Holmes. Under circumstances designed to leave no room for evasion, Miss Hastings was presented with the assembled evidence. "Miss Hastings," Holmes intoned with quiet authority, Your silence has been the canvas upon which you painted a narrative of deceit. Your every gesture, every carefully measured sign, has been reinterpreted by us as part of an elaborate plan to mask your guilt. As her eyes flickered with a mixture of defiance and resignation, her hands began to betray the tremors of a mind caught in the grip of desperation. Watson observed, "In that moment, it became clear that the very woman we once regarded as an innocent witness was, in truth, the architect of this treacherous crime." Despite her attempts to deflect and feign innocence through one final series of hurried signs, the accumulated evidence rendered her defences futile. The local constabulary, having been apprised of Holmes' deductions, moved swiftly to arrest her. As she was led away, Holmes pronounced, "Your silence, which you thought would forever protect you, has instead condemned you." In its absence of sound, the truth was able to echo all the louder than any cry. Watson added, "Let this serve as a somber reminder that appearances, however deceptive, cannot mask the inexorable pursuit of truth." In the aftermath, as the case was laid bare before a court of law, Holmes detailed his deductions with the precision of a master storyteller. He recounted the series of events: the murder of Mr. Blackwood, the strategic placement of a poison that delayed death, and the intricate manipulation of evidence by one who was expected to be an innocent bystander. The evidence, both physical and psychological, converges on one incontrovertible conclusion, Holmes declared, that the silent witness was, in fact, the murderer, and that her disability served not as a hindrance, but as a well-calculated alibi. Watson, recording these events for posterity, reflected on the profound implications of the case. "It is a lesson, Holmes," he wrote, "that the capacity for human deception is boundless, and that we must never allow our assumptions about vulnerability to blind us to the truth." Holmes responded in his final summation, "The mind, when determined to subvert justice, will harness every available advantage, even silence, to conceal its misdeeds." In the days that followed, the ripples of the case resonated throughout the investigative community. Miss Hastings's elaborate charade had become a case study in the perils of underestimating the seemingly unremarkable. Her downfall, wrought by her own ingenuity, served as a cautionary tale for detectives and scholars alike. "Let her case remind us that every gesture, every silence, carries meaning," Holmes remarked in one of his later reflections, "and that it is our duty to listen not only to words, but to the absence of them." As time marched on, Holmes and Watson continued their work, forever changed by the revelations of this extraordinary case. Their partnership, tempered by the fires of countless mysteries, grew ever more resolute in its commitment to unmasking truth wherever it might hide. Watson later recorded, "In Miss Hastings's carefully orchestrated silence, we witnessed the embodiment of calculated malice. A malice that wore the mask of vulnerability so convincingly that even the keenest observers were nearly deceived." Holmes concurred, "It is a stark reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed by layers of deception, will eventually prevail when guided by unwavering reason." The legacy of the silent witness endured as a testament to the enduring power of observation and the relentless pursuit of truth. Her crime, meticulously planned and executed behind the guise of harmlessness, became a symbol of how the unspoken can sometimes convey the most damning truths. As Holmes had once stated, never underestimate the potency of silence, for in its quietude, the most resounding secrets are often concealed. Thus, the case of Mr. Blackwood's murder and the shocking revelation of Miss Eleanor Hastings' guilt entered the annals of detective history, a narrative woven with layers of human frailty, ambition, and the dark art of deception. In the end, the silence that was meant to protect had instead exposed the most sinister of truths, affirming once more that in the world of investigation, nothing is ever as it appears.